All right, again, so for this class, the agenda and the topics we're going to cover in this mindset is going to be leadership style, ownership, communication, resilience, and then we're going to conclude. So, and real quick, is my volume okay? I don't want to yell, I got to do this all day, so I want to make sure it's a volume you can hear, but not too crazy. But can you hear me in the back pretty good? Okay, so this is our agenda, so we're going to go over, but real quick, when we're talking about mindset, like, what do you guys think about when you think about mindset? Like, someone give me an example. Like, what is mindset? It's a super open question, but it's a super open thought, right? Right? Well, mental aptitude, okay. What else? Okay, frame of reference on a situation, right? That's mindset. Okay. P, what do you got? Okay. Right, so those are all right things because when you say the word mindset, mindset can mean literally 100 different things to 100 different people, right? We can talk about there's combat mindset, there's leader mindset, there's a military mindset, you can go through all the different categories of mindset, right? I can pull up an Army manual to talk about leadership or talk about mindset that's going to tell you the 9 principles and the 3 tenets and all these different things that you need to do. But my big thing with mindset that I take away from it, that I want you guys to take away from this, is that mindset is something that always changes, right? It's something that you have, but it's something that should always morph, right? Just a quick story about me. When my first deployment to Iraq, 2005, and I'm in combat, a couple weeks go by and nothing's happened, right? I'm like, oh, we're catching bad guys, kicking doors, like, nothing bad happens here, everything's going great, right? Well then, like, what happens the first day I get shot at, I don't even know I'm being shot at, right? I remember being there, sitting on a knee, had my pelters on, and I heard like these noises over my head, and I thought it was bugs because it's Iraq and it was July, and I thought, like, I hate these bugs out here, and they're super annoying, and then I looked at my team leader, and I was like, man, what are those bugs? Just won't go away. And he's like, you're getting shot at, dummy. And I was like, oh, I have no idea. But I went into combat, my first trip as a young guy, and I thought combat and war was going to be like the movies. It was going to be booms and bangs and romantic and cool, and it really wasn't, right? But I went in with the wrong mindset, right? I went in this mindset thinking that it was going to be this cool, fun, easy experience, but then it starts to happen, and then it's just real and it's more raw, and then then you see the consequences of combat, right? Then now I'm seeing like people dying, people being murdered, people being like in pieces. So then it's like, okay, I really need to change my mindset because there's a lot at cost here. Does that make sense? So I was always told to have a certain mindset when I was new, but then it's not until I saw it did my mindset really change. Does that make sense? So I want you to understand, like, as I talk about things in this classroom, yes, a lot of it is like pontificating or talking about the things that we need or the things that you need to instill in yourself and in your subordinates. But it doesn't always sink in until you need it, right? But mindset is something that's always changed, right? Because you can have a growth mindset where you're always achieving for better. And then a lot of people get into a fixed mindset where they just want to coast their life, right? Does everyone know those people, right? They don't want to go back to school. They don't want to get another job. They don't want to try and get a raise. They're just like, I'm good where I'm at. I don't want to do anything else. I don't want to move. You know what I mean? We all know those people, right? They don't have a growth mindset. They don't have a thought process to work out or read a book or go on an adventure or do something new and better and search for more. They're really more just content in hiding in their little hole, right? So that's like a fixed mindset. And I just want to make sure nobody in this room has that mindset, and I want to make sure none of you teach your soldiers to have that mindset. Does that make sense? So those are just some things about mindset, because as you move forward and your goals and where you are in life, that should change your mindset, right? Like, who has kids? Right? So that's not even half. So a lot of people don't, like, does having kids not change your mindset on life or change your goals? Like, your mindset will always change, but I think if you always maintain a growth or a growing mindset, and with the pursuit of doing better, then that's what it will be for you, right? So just some things to keep in mind as we go through some other stuff. Now, we're about to move into leadership styles real quick. Big thing with leadership styles, we're going to talk about, you're going to get a leadership class, but I still think it's important to kind of nest that leadership styles into our mindset so that we know that we're being intentional leaders moving forward. Roger? All right, give me the next slide. Okay, so right before we get into mindset though, like who could tell me what the Army mission is? Super easy question. Nothing tricky. It's not a tricky question. What is it? Right, it's to win America's war, right? Army mission is to win America's wars. It's the most simple mission there is, and it's a simple way to think about it, right? But in that, you understand that if you don't have more of a combat type mindset, like how are you going to win America's wars, lead your men or women, and survive, right? How do you have a mindset where you can teach people to kill other people and be okay with it? Yeah? Does that kind of make sense? Like, that's what all of you do in here for the most part in this room, right? Almost everyone in here is a fire team leader for the most part, Roger, except for there's 19 deltas, but same thing, right? Your job in this room for 90% of this room is to close with and kill the enemy, right? You're all team leaders, so you're going to be right there, right? So how do you do that and then continue forward? Does that make sense? There's a little quote. Someone want to read a quote for me?
People sleep peacefully in their beds at night because rough men stand ready to do violence on their behalf.
Right. So it's like, this is just a quote that George Orwell wrote a long time ago, but it's something to think about where that's a mindset that you need to have, right? That's a mindset we should all have, right? Very few people actually join the military and serve this country, right? It's like less than 1%. So less than, of that 1%, how many of that percentage actually does any kind of direct action combat? It's like less than 11%. So then you're less than 11% of the less than 1% of the country, right? That's the small group of people ready to do violence for everybody else. Does that make sense? And I want you guys to be proud of that. I want you guys to have that mindset and know you do that mindset and know that you take like this job serious. Does that make sense? And again, the biggest mindset thing to keep in mind as we talk through the class that I want you guys to think about is this last, it's kind of a quote. I've heard it. I don't know whose quote it is. I just hear it all the time, and I've lived my life by it. But give me someone else to read the bottom.
We did not rise to the occasion and fall back on our lowest known training level.
Does that make sense to everybody? Right? How many people always think like, oh, well, no, when it happens, I'll be okay. I'll make it work, right? Or people sometimes you somehow think that you're going to just somehow have superhuman strength and be the tactical magician and save the day on the combat field, but never did a day of training actual combat. Does that make sense? Like, it's not how it works. What happens is in combat, when you're getting shot at and things are blowing up and things are falling apart, you're going to revert back to your lowest level of training that you have. Like, that's what's going to keep you alive. So if you have the mindset to maintain a strong, solid base of basic fundamentals that you can do in the most stressful time in your life, you will be okay. Does that make sense? So something to keep in mind, and this is how you keep like your soldiers alive, right? Your soldiers need to understand this, and they need to embrace this mindset that they're not going to rise to the occasion if something happens. They're only going to fall back to what they were last trained to do proficiently. Does that make sense? It's not like one day you did some really cool guy training and then a year later you're going to do it in combat and you think you're going to perform that proficiently? Probably not, right? So just from your mindset, you need to think and know that. And so if you know that, you should always be achieving for that proficient, solid base level of training. Does that make sense? All right. Okay. Well, if you guys can see it, I mean, this is nothing crazy, but when we're going through these leadership styles, I already put the answers up for you. Like, the different styles we're going to go through, and it's kind of a mix, right? So if you go into Army manuals, you'll see different leadership styles, different leadership principles, different leadership tenets, all that jazz. But what I want to do here is kind of make a hybrid of civilian leadership principles and military, because we're all guardsmen. We have civilian lives, and there's a lot to be known from a civilian leadership standpoint as well, right? That, especially I think, in a more holistic sense as well. So, so the first leadership style is autocratic. Can somebody give me like some attributes of what an autocratic leader would be? Like, I even got pictures up there to kind of help you out.
Dictator.
Okay. So like a dictator. What else?
Leading through fear, not through trust.
Lead through fear, not through trust. It's like a good Stalin example. You say selfish or self-serving, okay?
His word is final.
Okay, right. So the autocratic leader's word is final. There's no debate, right? What are some examples of like an autocratic leader, like people you can think of from history, helping you out with some pictures? Right. So like those are like more extreme type examples. Sure. But now let's go through the pros and cons of like an autocratic leadership style. So like what is a good thing about being an autocratic leader? Did you say achievable? Okay. It's very direct. It's very fast, right? It's very fast. Like I say this happens, it happens, and it's happening now, right?
It's good for combat
It's good for combat, right? And why is it good for combat?
because there's no ifs, ands, or buts. It's just there's the directive. This is the mission. This is
Sure. Right? Like we're getting shot at. Do I say like, hey, London, what should we go right, or do you think we should go left? Like, that style of leadership isn't going to work in that moment, right? Like, definitely going to need an autocratic type authoritative, because it's more authoritative, right? Style. But what's some negatives to being like the autocratic leadership style? You could be wrong. What's up? So it's like, yeah, he said like mutiny, so it's like, it doesn't build a lot of trust, right? Yes? Everyone's not on the same page? I mean, maybe, right, they might not be on the same page, but they're still going to do it, right? So kind of agree and disagree with you there, because I still think it is the same page because everyone's doing the same thing, even if they don't like it. So, and so we already kind of went over some examples, but do you have something else?
It relies on a single point experience.
Right, you're relying on that one person at that one moment in time or whatever it is. It's like that heavy authoritative, this is happening right now, right? Again, bad for maybe like always doing it on a garrison type leadership style every single day, but you need some of that when it comes to quick decisions that need to happen in the heat of combat. Does that make sense? So it has its purpose. Next slide. This one should be pretty easy, right? So a democratic leadership style, what are some attributes that you would think come out of that? Or like, all right, so it's more of a team. It's more open-minded. You're getting more buy-in from subordinates, right? Now, we apply this still in the military, right? Do we not? Yes? Give me some examples. Sure. Sure. But I mean, you guys do it on a daily basis, or maybe not daily, but almost close. Sometimes you just don't think about it, right? Maybe who in here on Fridays does like some fun PT event? Some people, maybe not. I don't know. So some squads, maybe on like a Friday or a certain day of the week, they say this is like sports fun PT day, and maybe some days the squad leader says we're doing ultimate frisbee. We're doing ultimate frisbee, and it's always ultimate frisbee because it's his favorite sport. That's like autocratic, right? But maybe sometimes the squad leader's like, hey, what do you guys want to do for sport PT? And then everybody in the squad votes, like volleyball, soccer, basketball, and there's a vote, and there's a consensus, and then the squad does that for PT. Does that make sense? So that would be a leadership style to approach something, right? So what are some pros that come with democratic leadership style? Sure. Right. So he said you get some buy-in, and they can like increase like subordinate value, right? They'll feel valued. You know. He said they can. Says they can feel more motivated. Sure. Right. So like a brainstorm, right? So if you kind of got everyone's opinion on a matter, you could come up with maybe the best solution rather than a solution to something. Does that make sense? Is that what you're saying? Okay. What's up? Like increase morale? Okay. But so he said increase morale, or he said morale, but can morale go down because you always vote for shit all the time? Right? So like I'm just kind of segueing into our cons, right? So like what are some negatives to the democratic leadership styles? Big thing is time, right? So it takes more time. What else? It can be really indecisive. What else? Not everybody agrees, right? So now what you can kind of get a stymie issue within a team if you always do a democratic leadership style all the time, and someone always feel left out because their side never gets picked, then it can actually create more division, right? Right? So it's just, I'll close all the loops on all this in a little bit, but it's just something to think about, right? And like the little quick example I used, if we're in the heat of battle, I think even the BC used it, right? In his wrestling analogy, you can't say like, oh hey, time out, let me go ask my team what they want to do, right? Should we squad attack or should we break contacts, right? That's one person's decision, right? So that's something to keep in mind. So any other questions or comments about democratic leadership style before we move on? All right. Okay, so this is like the epitome army leadership style that you will see 90% of the time, whatever unit you go to, and generally whatever military branch you serve in, you'll typically run into this as the default style that is taught, that is indoctrinated, and that is used. So, does anyone know what transactional leadership is? Yes.
It's basically a tete-a-tete, so you give me, I then give you. It could be good or bad. If you mess up, then you get reprimand. If you do well, you get accolade.
Correct. Right? So again, this is like the army style, right? You do good, you get an award. You do bad, you get smoked, or you get Article 15, right? It's like, it's the whole carrot versus punishment. Does that make sense, right? So as a transactional leadership style in the military, it's very like, you messed up, you get the hammer, right? You did good, or like, here's a carrot, you can earn accolades or good things, and then you can move towards that. Does that make sense? So this is so the civilian world calls it transactional, so it is a transactional leadership, but a lot of civilian entities will call it leadership or military style leadership. Does that make sense? You'll hear that a lot because this is like the default button for like NCOs basically almost. So what are some pros to this style or that you guys see? I mean, we do it every day. Right. So he said you'll feel more motivated because you know what the outcome might be, right? So if I can kind of expand on that, I think, so what I would kind of add to that is that typically expectations and standards are generally clear, right? Especially in general, but when you have a good leader, when you do counselings and you have expectations, you know if I do X, I'm in like the green zone, right? It's like if I do Y, I will get in trouble. Does that all make sense? Like the boundaries are really clear in transactional leadership for the most part, right? Like if you go out and do an amazing exercise and impress everybody, you'll likely get high fives, pats on the back, maybe an award. Or if you went out with your buddies and made a bunch of poor decisions out on the town, like what do you think, like that, you know you're in the red zone, right? Like something bad's gonna happen to you and you know what's gonna happen, right? You know you're just gonna get UCMJ, you know there's gonna be informal punishment, right? The expectations are clear. So that's like a good pro to transactional leadership is that when you have that style, your subordinates typically know their left and right limits and what they need to move towards and what they need to stay away from. Does that generally make sense in that style? Any other pros you guys can think of in this style? Right, so it does allow like a little bit of that freedom, right? For like subordinates to make choices. And then the transactionalism is the consequence. But, okay, anything negative or some cons you see in this style? Okay, so she said that you'll find more sticks than carrots. That is generally true. I would not disagree with her. What else? Favoritism. That is a thing, right? So yeah, that's like for another class I would give about like talent selection and talent management, but that's for a different day, different class. But yeah, in all leadership styles, you have to watch favoritism, right? Whatever one you would choose, it's never good. What else you guys got back there? What's that? Oh, okay. So like the carrot wasn't there at the end of the road. Okay, right. So okay, I agree. So like, but if you action this style correctly, that wouldn't be the case, right? So like, that would be you maybe attempting this leadership style and not doing it correctly. Does that make sense? So it's not that it's a negative of the style. It's a negative that the style wasn't used correctly. Does that make sense? So if you use this correctly, then the carrot will be there. Now, if your carrots weren't there before, then that's just some shortcomings. We're all people, right? So no one's perfect. But just remember, as the leadership style goes, as long as it's executed right, then that shouldn't be the case. All right, go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so servant leadership. Somebody give me some attributes of what a servant leader looks like or acts like. What's that? Okay, others prefer themselves. What else?
Putting into action what you're wanting to do. Like, so you're telling your guys to do something, serving right alongside that, doing exactly what you're
Sure.
so that you're willing to do exactly what they're doing, so you take care of it.
Right. What else? Any other attributes of a servant leader?
He doesn't delegate as much. He'd rather do work instead of delegating.
Okay, so the servant leader does the work themselves and doesn't delegate. What else? All? Sure. So servant leader makes sacrifices for the greater good of their people. So those are all good attributes. What are some pros to being a servant leader?
Develops trust.
Okay. What else? Okay, so people follow you because they want to, not because they have to. You say builds camaraderie. What are some negatives to servant leadership? Right? Get taken advantage of, stepped on. What's up? Same thing. Some other negatives to being to a servant leadership style. You say dependence? Oh, right. Okay. Like, if they're a servant leader, is that what you mean?
If they're the servant leadership, if it's too much, I guess, or too high of an expectation of servant leadership, then that's exhausting.
Okay. So, and then I'll add this other con, like, so these are all, you guys are doing great. You guys are doing a good job, but what about this? Like, what if you're too much of a servant leader, are you going to send your troops into where they likely might die? Right? Like, if you're so much of a servant leader to sacrifice for your men and not do work for them, you don't want to delegate stuff, and you always want to do the extra for your soldiers, then are you going to then send them into the lion's den to likely, you're going to get some casualties, right? It's combat. It's going to happen. Does that make sense? So another good example to think about, I don't know, how many people from HHC here work in the S6 shop? Just one? Just ball? Okay. So is anybody in here, does anybody remember, this is a good example, just a couple weeks ago. S6 shop. Remember when everyone had to turn in our antennas? Did anybody help with that? Like we had to turn in antennas and the JBCP transceivers? Nobody did that. So just the common people did it? Okay, well check it out. So all our JBCBs had to get turned in, yeah? And they had to get re-imaged to have maps and all this other jazz. We had to get those back to you, to the soldiers, by a certain time, and the S6 shop had to work through the weekend to make sure those got done and they're ready to be distributed Sunday and Monday, right? So if your servant leadership is out of whack, like let's say you're the S6, like in charge, and you're like, well, I'm not going to do that because my guys are getting their weekends off. Nope. But what does that happen to everybody else then? Now, nobody else can achieve their mission because they're unwilling to do their job because they, and again, this is out of servant leadership. It is not to be obstinate. It is not to be insubordinate. It's that they're trying to be a servant leader. And I see this a lot nowadays. I see this a lot, and especially guard leadership, where servant leadership is too out of bounds. It's so strong that you're not doing your job, right? Like, we're not doing that because it's going to put my guys out. My guys getting their weekends. Nope. But then it makes everybody else suffer. Does that make sense? Does everyone see what I'm saying? That's when your servant leadership is so strong that you can't function correctly within the scope of the whole team. Does that make sense? So like S6 worked their weekend, gave up their weekend so that we could accomplish the mission, right? They understand, doesn't mean that they're not a servant leader. You could still have servant leadership attributes, and you use it when you need it. Does that make sense? Go ahead, next slide. All right. Cool French word. I'm not a big fan of French words, but here we go. This is like a laissez-faire or laissez-faire, however you want to pronounce it. I don't know who speaks France. You speak French? Laissez-faire. Is that good enough for me? All right. Laissez-faire. All right. So what is a laissez-faire leadership style?
Haphazard.
Haphazard?
Hands-off.
Super hands-off? What else? Sometimes it's a good thing at times, right? So we got some attributes which I think are pretty spot on, very hands off. I really can't think of a better way to explain it. And there's some pros and cons. So what are some pros? What? Allows freedom of maneuver to the subordinate, right? Okay. Okay. What else over here?
If you're trying to like train a soldier for a leadership position, just kind of letting him make the decision and then showing him the faults and decisions made.
Right. So there's some aspect where it's hands off to let little bird fly from the nest, right? Okay. What are some negative, like? Sure. Right. If you're too hands off, things can go off the rails, right?
People could become complacent.
Yeah. People just don't do their jobs anymore because it's too hands off. What else?
It's not really leadership at some point. If you're completely hands off, then you're not leading.
Sure. Right. So at some point, like, is it even leadership anymore if you're just really not doing your job anymore, right? So there's some aspects to it, right? But if you're a good, strong, subordinate leader, sometimes you love to work for this style, right? Like, how come? Like, we've talked about those things. Like, I know for me, like, that's all I usually crave. I crave to be left alone, like, because I have that drive to seek out my own goals and move out to what I want to do, and I know I'll use discipline initiative, and I'll be okay, right? I don't. This is like the opposite of micromanagement, right? Like we talked about, the freedom of maneuver. I get to color outside the lines a little bit if I want, or to achieve what I want, or the color that I want, or the picture that I want. Does that kind of make sense? Right? So, and this approach can be really important because for some people, some leaders, like, grip so tight to the control, right? Sometimes this is a good leadership style to kind of like, let go, let your subordinate leaders take over, let them do your job a little bit, like, so that they're prepared for the next level, right? Like, all of you in here should be training somebody to replace you, right? That's the big point of leadership. So, anything else about the laissez-faire leaders and leadership style? All right, give me next slide. Okay, transformational leadership. Anybody know what this is? Go for it.
It's leadership that tries to inspire a higher echelon of like education or understanding of the job. So I think this would be most applicable to like medics.
Okay. Anything else for the transformational? So this is a leadership style that kind of tries to achieve all the things we just talked about, right? So the big thing about transformational leadership is, and using that style, is to find the leadership style to use in the moment. Does that make sense? To not always try to prescribe to a style that is ingrained all the time. Does that make sense? So you're going to find that, like, the theme of my class in general is going to be always seeking balance and looking to keep things even. Does that make sense? And being really intentional about what we do and how we do it, right? So the more intentional and purposeful you are with everything that you do, you can apply these things with X-Acto knife precision. Does that make sense? So, like, in the moment, when a soldier does something or you're trying to deal with a leadership problem, you think about how you want to approach this. Like, and you think about all these styles. And you think about, and then I'm not going to go through, we'll go through communication in a minute. But you think about the styles, and they have communication. And then it shouldn't just be you handle everything the same way all the time, right? Are we all in agreement to that for leadership? Right? It should always be kind of a case-by-case basis. And what is going to solve this problem the most effective way? And is it going to require me to be authoritative in this moment? Maybe I need to be a democratic leader in this moment. Maybe servant leadership is the key to this problem, right? So then you have these different styles, and then we'll talk about communication and delivery later. But there's a purpose behind everything we do, and it's very intentional. Does that make sense? And so we'll just go ahead and next slide. All right, so I already kind of talked about the balance. I already kind of went ahead a little bit. So when we're talking about balance, I already said it, but it's us using all the leadership styles all the time, right? Don't ever pigeonhole yourself to always use one, right? And one is not superior to the other. It's that these different styles are used for its purpose intended at the time. Does that make sense? Has anyone read the book? It's called Mission Men and Me. No? All right. Well, it's a cool book. Cool Delta guy wrote it. But obviously from the title, you can kind of take away that the aspect of the book in leadership talks about how the mission comes first, then men, then myself. And with that, what it's talking about is kind of like the priority of life model, but it's like if you take care of the mission first, then the men are taken care of, and then yourself, right? So kind of talk like it's a little bit of that servant leadership where it's like you're putting yourself last, but you can even take it another step if you want to like up your servant leadership style. And for an example, is like in a garrison environment, you could even maybe flip around those words and make it men mission me, right? Because if you put the people first at times, especially in like a garrison environment, and you're just training or training up for something, the mission is training, and sometimes if you take care of the men, then the mission gets taken care of, and then yourself, right? At the bottom line up front, it's like you're always last. That's true. But when you go to combat, can you maintain that men mission me mindset? You sure couldn't, right? That would be, you just can't. There's too much risk involved. If you maintain that, you would never actually conduct combat, because that's the only way to guarantee that nobody gets hurt, right? So is everyone kind of picking up on the balance aspect of things, right? We talked about all these leadership styles. We talked about the good things in each one. We talked about the bad things in each one. We talked about examples in each one, how to apply them on a daily basis, and how to apply them with balance and intentionality. Does that make sense? So there's always a reason for everything that you do, right? You don't act the way you act because you were born that way. You don't act the way you act because that's how you are. You act the way you act because leadership is an action, right? Leadership is not a job. Leadership is not a role. It is something that you do. Does that make sense? So if it's leadership is something that you do, it should be something that you do with intentionality and purpose. Does that make sense? So if there's any questions on leadership style, we're going to go ahead and take a break and have you back here at 1100.